have had a whole lot of names, and they've tackled a whole lot of cars, but these guys are the last hurrah of American muscle in an era of electrification and hybridization and scaling down engines. These guys are making massive V8 monsters designed to crush the dunes, the drag strip, and the track. This is Dodge's SRT division. SRT began long before they were called SRT with the Viper. Bob Lutz, Chrysler's then president, told his friend Tom Gill that a modern Shelby Cobra would be awesome and that they should totally make it. Luckily, Tom Gill was a brilliant designer who worked on everything from the Barracuda to the K-Car. So they had an idea, and they had the right man to draw up that idea. All they needed was a team to actually execute said idea. So Tom assigned 85 of Chrysler's best engineers to work on this new supercar with Carroll Shelby himself. Since this car was called the Viper, this crack team was called Team Viper, very original. And the early Vipers had no electronic aids, air conditioning, airbags, roof, and door handles. It was a minimalist track car that just so happened to have a Lamborghini-built 8-liter V10 under the hood, good for 400 horsepower. It was the ultimate no-frills race car and a spiritual successor to the Cobra in every sense of the word. It was also a massive success despite seriously trying to murder every single person who drove it. I'm not going to go in depth about the Viper because I already covered it in a previous episode, but the early Vipers culminated with the 1999 ACR. Team Viper took the lethal brute and made it into a track ballerina. It was a homage to the Viper's hat trick of Le Mans class victories by 2000, so it got a bump up to 460 horsepower and a chassis redesign that made it lighter and stiffer, before being topped off with better suspension, brakes, tires, the whole 9 yards, and it proved to be comparable to a far more expensive 911 GT2. So with the success of the Viper, Team Viper moved on to their next project and their next name, Team Prowler, working on the Plymouth Prowler. This is a very underappreciated car. A lot of people don't like this because of the engine, and that is fair. The engine really needed to be a V8, but the styling is awesome. I love the look of the Prowler. And then, after the kind of success-ish of the Prowler, they moved on to their new name, Specialty Vehicle Engineering in 2000, and then their new name in Performance Vehicle Operations in 2002, before finally settling on Street and Racing Technology in 2004. It's confusing, I know, but they all did the same thing. Make Chryslers go really fast. And in the early 2000s, SRT got their fingers on pretty much any car they could. A Dodge Caliber hatchback with a 2.1-liter, nearly 300 horsepower 4-cylinder. They stuffed a 6.1-liter Hemi into the Chrysler 300 sedan, the Jeep Grand Cherokee SUV, and the Dodge Magnum Estate car to make the SRT-8 brand. But apart from those oddities and oddballs, there were a few notable vehicles. The Dodge Neon was a pretty bland front-wheel drive economy car, but Gale saw the rise of JDM popularity and thought that this bland economy car could fit. Eventually. With a lot of work. A lot of work that SRT did in just 4 months, including a new turbocharger added to the PT Cruiser engine, a new gearbox from their turbo diesel minivan, a strengthened clutch, vented disc brakes, and a rear spoiler. All in all, it made 230 horsepower and 250 torque. The front-wheel drive sedan could do 0 to 60 in 5.3 seconds stock. And considering the whole premise was to be appealing to the tuner world, those power figures only went up. Even SRT got in on the act by making an ACR Neon as well. So it had lowered suspension, fully adjustable dampers, a thicker stabilizer bar, and wider BBS wheels. Then we have the other end of the spectrum from the little tiny front-wheel drive sedan, with the Ram SRT-10. You see, by 2003, the Viper was in its second iteration with an even bigger 8.3-liter V10 that made 500 horsepower. And Dodge had the ultimate first-world problem. They had this amazing V10, but no other cars that it could fit in. But then they remembered that the diesel V8 that served as the launching point for the Viper engine was actually from the Ram 1500. So they stuffed the Viper V10 into a Ram. Granted, it was a significantly redesigned Ram since it had to somehow handle all that power without dying, so it got 305 tires from the Viper, a 2.5-inch drop in the ride height, Bilstein suspension, and a rear wing. That meant this rear-wheel drive pickup truck with no weight over the back could not only handle its 500 horsepower, but also do 0 to 60 in 4.9 seconds. It's still one of the fastest pickups ever made 18 years later. And then we have another weird one. The Chrysler Crossfire was one of the few decent things to come out of the Chrysler and Mercedes partnership, but their Halo car was still a little numb to drive, so SRT was given the keys to see what they could do. And the SRT-6 is, as far as I'm aware, the only time SRT and AMG actually worked together. AMG gave him a 3.2-liter supercharged V6, making 330 horsepower and some other drivetrain elements from their SLK-32 AMG. Meanwhile, SRT got to work on the aerodynamics and improving the brakes. This was a seriously underrated car with active aerodynamics and a sub-3,000-pound curb weight for the coupe. But even with this partnership, it sold less than 5,000 in 4 years, and the Crossfire was axed in 2008 following the global economic crisis. But now we get into their more obvious ones, the Challengers and the Chargers. When they came out in 2008 and 2006 respectively, SRT took their Hemi V8s and brought them up a notch. To brutally oversimplify things, since I've already done videos on the Challenger and the Charger, we're going to do a bit of a speed run through their milestones, okay? SRT's first involvement with the Charger was the SRT-8, which had a 6.1-liter Hemi good for 425 horsepower. The Challenger SRT-8, for one reason or another, wouldn't come out in 2009, but it had the exact same engine. And both vehicles got refreshes in 2015. The SRTs got refreshed too. The SRT-8 was dropped in favor of the SRT-392 because the name wasn't long enough already, but it had a new 6.4-liter V8 making 485 horsepower. That was already more than the comparably priced Mustangs and Camaros. However, Dodge got wind of the Shelby's GT500 662 horsepower supercharged V8 and realized their true purpose in life as the halo shined down upon them. They need to make the most powerful factory V8 in America. The result were the 2015 SRT Hellcats. A massive supercharger was bolted onto that 6.4-liter V8 to make 707 horsepower. In 2015, only 6 production cars in the world were more powerful. And the Challenger cost just 65 grand. Granted, it is the definition of a point-and-shoot muscle car, with its 4,000 pounds plus weight and rather unsophisticated suspension, but that's kind of its main charm. Everybody else is focusing on handling and lap times and 0 to 60. Dodge is just having a riot of a time, and I respect that. And yet they still wanted more. The current SRT Hellcats have the Super Stock option, which is a combination of what made each Hellcat era great. Massive horsepower? Check. Ridiculous body kit? Check. Drag racing optimized suspension? Check. They're insane. They're holistically impractical, terribly inefficient, and awful to drive, but I kind of love them. I really like driving the Charger Daytona. I drove that one a while ago, and that was a riot. But speaking of drag racing, we need to talk about SRT's Halo cars. Now, a Halo car is usually a limited run show-off of what that company can do when there are no rules or focus groups. Now, SRT's first Halo car was arguably the 1999 ACR Viper I mentioned earlier, and that culminated in the third-gen, 2017 ACR Viper. As a send-off to the Viper as a whole, SRT focused all of their energy on turning the Snake into the ultimate track star. For 130 grand, you got a full racing harness, fully adjustable Bilstein dampers, custom-designed racing tires, extensive carbon fiber, and zero rear visibility. There is a mirror, but if you take one look through it, you will quickly see the 1776mm wide rear wing from the Extreme Aero package blocking your view. And if you get the Extreme Aero package, not only does the car sprout that famous rear wing, it gets front splitter extensions, a bigger diffuser, and a whole lot of dive planes. All in all, the EAP, as I call it, produces 2,000 pounds of downforce, helping the ACR break 14 lap records, including Laguna Seca, where it beat the Porsche 918 hypercar by a second. And at the Nürburgring, its 7-minute and 1-second privateer lap is the fastest ever for a manual transmission all of these years later. But with the Viper being discontinued in 2017, SRT had to focus all of their energy on a new Halo car, this time going in a straight line. The Hellcat was already a quarter-mile monster, but Dodge decided to make the quarter-mile road car, so it had a trans brake that automatically shifted between first and second gear, skinny bicycle tires as a $1 extra, an engine tune designed for 100-octane fuel, and 230 pounds taken from the weight. All in all, the Dodge Demon made 840 horsepower in a rear-wheel drive, 4,200-pound, 85-grand muscle car that did the standing quarter mile on a drag prep surface in 9.65 seconds at 140 miles an hour. At launch, it was the fastest road car ever in the quarter mile, beating the Model S P100D electric car by almost a second. It was also a tenth of a second faster than the entire hypercar Holy Trinity, and it's still the 5th fastest production car ever in the quarter mile. But the Demon was a limited run, 3,500 unit production, and pretty soon they were back to their original predicament of needing another Halo car. And they looked around at having conquered the track and the drag strip and decided to conquer the dunes. Now that would mean going up against the off-road king since 2010, the Ford Raptor. And in that moment, SRT engineers looked for inspiration and came to the 1993 masterpiece of cinema that is Jurassic Park. Dr. Grant and co. are about to be eaten by a trio of velociraptors, and then BAM! A magical T-Rex sneaks his way in like a ninja and tears the raptors a new one, saving Dr. Grant. And thus the Ram T-Rex was born. Now the T-Rex isn't exactly quiet like it was in the movie. This was, like everything else in Dodge's lineup, a Hellcatified pickup with a 702 horsepower V8. Then it was fitted with massive 18-inch off-road shocks and massiver 35-inch off-road tires. I mean, sure, you could rock crawl with a 6,400-pound truck, or you could do what it was really meant to do and blast through the sand dunes at breakneck speed. It does 60 miles an hour in under 4 seconds and is the new undisputed king of high-speed off-roading. At least until Ford releases the Shelby-powered Raptor R, but honestly, if I was a betting man, SRT is just toying with Ford because they can still put the Red-Eye engine into the T-Rex, which makes 40 horsepower more than the Shelby V8. And that's not the only thing potentially in SRT's future. For one, SRT isn't technically a thing anymore. After that Stellantis merger last year, SRT lost its title as a separate internal company. It's still around, but it's back to being a very fancy trim level instead of its own brand, which is probably for the best. Things got really confusing with that whole branding issue. But the bigger problem is that their hilarious V8s that define them are getting discontinued. Due to changing times, the Hemi V8, which dates back to 1951, will be phased out in 2023. Now SRT is going to have to work with the much less cool-sounding Global Medium Engine T6, a turbocharged 6-cylinder. And on top of that, electrification will gradually and inevitably trickle into the SRT brand over time, I have no doubts. They will probably be just as impressive as their ACRs and their Demons, but these Souls with their V6s and potentially electric powertrains? Well, we'll have to wait and see.